Okay, why don't we go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to our DMICE Thursday conference. And actually there's probably, hopefully people out there in Cyberland listening in because between, we have pretty good social media coverage between the two of us, Keith and I. Anyways, so today is one of our special talks. So as all the locals know, we have our Thursday conference. Some of them have a specific designation or whatever we'll call it. Today's talk being an IDL talk, the Informatics Discovery Lab. And then we're actually adding another one next week, a week from today. Will actually be our first clinical informatics grand rounds, which we need to do as part of our new ACGME accredited fellowship in clinical informatics. And but the talks are just always on the usual Thursday time, and they have different designations. So some of them are plain ordinary research talks, but we're always here usually on Thursdays at 11:30, and for the last several years we've actually been streaming them, and so people can listen in over the web, which I've done from time to time when I've been out of town and wanted to hear a talk. And so we're doing that today, and then as a way of allowing people to ask questions, they can actually tweet with the hashtag DMICEConf, DMICECONF, and it doesn't happen that much. Every now and then it does. It did when I was watching in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia at 10:30 at night a couple of years ago. And I did tweet at Julie Dovern when she was, I think she was defending her dissertation proposal. So anyways, our speaker today is Keith Boone. And Dick Gibson here said, it's great that you bring in these national luminaries, and Keith is certainly one. And what I said to him, national luminary, he's here taking a course in our master's degree program, which Keith has been in the last couple of years. It's actually been quite a joy to have him in the program. I knew him a little bit before he enrolled, and he certainly brings a wealth of prior expertise into the program as a standards developer, author, lecturer, etc. And he's made good progress through the master's degree program, and he happens to be here with a number of others who are in the room for a short course that we have, or a hybrid course is the official name that we call them, which I happen to be teaching on evidence-based medicine. But anyways, we thought that while he was here, we might as well tap his expertise on FHIR, which if you don't know, you should know, because FHIR is it's sort of like the perfect storm. As we've spent our $30 billion on electronic health records over the last 5 years that don't talk to each other, we realize that we need interoperability in a hurry for the first time. We've been talking about interoperability for decades. But anyways, and the kind of the standard that has emerged because of limitations in HL7 version 2 and 3 is this one called FHIR, Fast Health Interoperability Resources. And some of you know that I've been talking around the department for the last year or two saying, you know, we need to pay attention to this. It's important. Anyways, I don't want to cut into Keith's time too much, but just by way of introduction, I don't know if it's his official job title, but he is a standards geek for GE, and he's held another.
That's what it says on my card.
That's what it says on his card, so that must be legit. Like I said, he's a lecturer and author. He's been involved with HL7 and other standards organizations, HIE, over the years. His book, the CDA book about clinical document architecture, is well known. He's been on a number of ONC committees, and maybe his most important thing is that he's a student in our master's program, although that won't be for too long because he'll eventually graduate. He's also known as the motorcycle guy. I don't know if he's going to say anything about his motorcycle, but if he is, I will let him say that. And then the talk today, as I said, is an IDL talk in Informatics Discovery Lab, which is an initiative in our department headed by Aaron Cohen to try to integrate more with the outside world in terms of the skills and talents that we have in informatics. So I'm going to sit down at this point and turn it over to Keith.
So thank you. So I'm going to talk to you today about FHIR and why it's a hot topic for interoperability, and we'll get a little bit into that. I sort of feel bad coming out here to Portland talking about fires because, you know, I'm driving back and forth to classes every day, and that's all I hear about on the radio is all of the wildfires that we had here and then last month. But FHIR is Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources. As Bill mentioned, I'm a standards geek, 4G healthcare. It does actually say that on my business card. The secret, though, is that when I order business cards, I have to type in all the stuff that goes on it. So that's not my official HR title, but that's the title that's on my card, and that's how I introduce myself to everybody. My role in GE Healthcare is essentially to represent GE to standards organizations like Health Level 7 or HL7, integrating the healthcare enterprise or IHE, and then also to national activities. What I'm going to be talking about today, we'll cover shortly some introductions, talk about what FHIR is and maybe even what it isn't, who's doing it, how it's being developed, who's involved, what kinds of things you might do with FHIR. We're going to have some interactive pieces on that. You're going to learn a little bit about FHIR, and then you're going to tell me what you think you might be able to do with this. And that's actually going to also help inform the development of the specification. We will actually take a look at the FHIR specifications online. So a couple years back, HL7 decided that they were going to make the HL7 standards freely accessible to everybody. And when FHIR came in, FHIR said, we're going to open source the specifications. So you don't even need to be an HL7 member to get access to some of these important developments here. Look at what problems FHIR might help you solve. We'll do a little bit of interactive exploration where you can sort of talk to me about a problem that maybe you have where you think FHIR might help, and we can explore a little bit together how that might work. So to put this up here, HL7, FHIR, CDA, some of these things that I'm going to be talking about are registered trademarks of HL7. So that's the usual trademark and copyright, and actually that FHIR logo is also a registered trademark. So that's me, and some of you I've already met, and many of the others of you haven't. So I'm going to start in the back of the room with the troublemakers, okay, and just find out who we have in the room. So I want two things. So who you are and what do you want to get out of this? And who you are is going to include your name and maybe who you're affiliated with, and then what you want to get out of it. So we'll start back here.
Rob Schupp, Director of Clinical Research Systematic for CPSA here, and I am hoping to get out of this some of your own hands-on experiences with FHIR, some of the implementation challenges there.
Okay. Interesting implementation challenges. Great. So the young lady trying to figure out what kind of pizza she's going to get there. Okay.
My name is Jorge Gonzalez. I'm also a CX policy. Yeah, I just want to learn more about how FHIR is and how it's used.
I'm Joanne Fleury. I'm a faculty member in B-Nice, and I teach in the health information management area, so have an overall interest in this area.
Okay. Terrific. Yes, we did. Great.
Kevin O'Brien, informatics fellow at Washington University in St. Louis, and I'm actually interested in how to use FHIR to build on the funds that provide the capability to these guys and supplemental their internal functionality.
So you might want to hear a little bit about SMART. Okay. Okay, terrific. So we have some space from HIM, we have some space operational, and we'll look at some of those. Good.
Hi, I'm Sarika Kali. I am a new PhD student here in the United States, hosting on campus, studying under the mentorship of Healthcare Interoperability Resources.
Excellent.
Cindy Feldman, I'm actually in a class, the first class, in master's program.
So we pre-populated the room with my evidence-based medicine class, and I'm going to try to tie some of this to evidence-based medicine as well.
Tom Mahoney, one of the master's students, just interested in learning about FHIR.
Cool.
Eric Wong, I'm a second PhD student in this program. Just wanted to talk about this one.
All right.
Tim Burdick, I'm the Chief Clinical Research Informatics Officer. I'm here to make sure that Rob has a break from the work.
The Chief Clinical Research Informatics Officer, so another C-level title somewhere in there, or chief-level title.
Hi, I'm Chris Schaefer. I'm from the library, and I'm just interested in interoperability standard access to fast.
Ooh, like that one.
I'm Erin Foster. I'm a National Library of Medicine Fellow at Federal History Library, and I'm specifically interested in the interoperability.
Okay, I have a question for you later.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Pullen. I'm an administrator in pediatrics, and I'm just interested in where information is going and
Cool.
exposure.
Hi, I'm Brent Lorenzen, emergency physician, clinical informatics fellow at the University of Arizona, here for the course, and wondering if the reality is going to live up to the hype.
Ooh, great question. Yeah.
Just a reminder, you need to use some eyes because people are out in
Okay. So
No, when people talk, they should
push your buttons when you talk. Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Rick Mai. I'm in the Online Master Program. I'm from Canada. And I thought when you were talking about FHIR yesterday, I thought it was about the forest fires.
I'm Steve Chamberlain. I'm a new postdoc fellow here at DMICE, and I'm interested in interoperability, learning more.
Okay, great.
I'm Dustin Piesel. I'm a student in the MBI program, and I'm hoping to be both entertained and educated by your presentation today.
Awesome.
Hi, I'm Elspeth Gigox. I'm also in the MBI program and a current student in the evidence-based medicine course, interested in interoperability and what you'll be seeing.
I'm Aaron Cohn. I'm faculty in the department. I'm head of the IDL effort, as Bill said, and I'm very interested in finding out more about what FHIR can and can't do, which I guess is the same thing as is it going to live up to the hype or not, but kind of that direction.
Okay, good. We can talk about some of that.
Hi, Keith. I'm Dick Gibson, a physician and voluntary faculty member here at DMICE, and interested in how likely it is that vendors are going to pick this up and on what time frame.
I have a slide for you.
There you go.
Hi, my name is Gene Wren. I'm a student in the MBI program, and I'm interested in just learning about FHIR myself.
Okay, awesome.
I am Nelson Sanchez. I'm a pediatric critical care faculty at the University of Chicago, and my interest is in integration of various devices like ventilators, monitors, and the EHR to build decision support tools in real time.
All right. I have a slide for you as well.
Cornel Antonescu, I'm a MBI student and physician informaticist in Phoenix. I would like to know, how do we reconcile medication data between EMRs? For example, we struggled with transitioning people from NextGen to Cerner, for 3 months. We eventually made it for allergies, couldn't make it
So
for
when we get
medications.
to the how can fire help you solve your problems, let's come back and look at that one. That's a great problem.
Hi, my name is Ben Cordier. I'm a second-year master's student, and I'm mostly interested in interoperability.
All right, great. You already introduced yourself, but go ahead again.
I'm Bill Hirsch, and I saw there was pizza in here, so I get a free lunch.
We tweeted about the free pizza. It seems to have been effective.
Hi, Keith. We're glad to have you here. I'm Elizabeth Parker, and I'm also in the IDL with Aaron and Deb. And this is kind of our world, so interoperability is so important.
Great. So I have one last introduction to do, and to do that, I'm actually going to turn my back on the audience. So this is actually a painting done for me by a woman by the name of Regina Holliday. Regina is an artist in Washington, D.C., whose husband died of cancer about 4 years ago. She painted a great big mural on the side of a gas station telling her story. And in so doing came to national attention and has now been painting the backs of lab coats and sport coats, et cetera, of people in the healthcare profession to tell their particular story. So you can see the motorcycle here. That's motorcycle guy. There's this guy with this sort of Vitruvian shape that looks like he was originally wearing a jacket. It's because I do have one of her jackets that was painted with a phoenix on the back of it. And the jacket exploded and turned into the motorcycle vest. And what I'm doing is burning down silos or exploding silos of information with fire. And that was her interpretation of what I do for my day job. So that's so if you can actually look her up online. It's Holiday with 2 L's, and the jacket, or this particularly the sleeveless jacket as she calls it, the only one that exists, is part of the walking gallery. So I don't need to go through all of this because we've already done a lot of that. But let's talk about what is FHIR here. So first off, you're all fairly familiar with the fact that this is a new standard from Health Level 7. All right. It is also what we call a RESTful API for granular health data. So this is not how I'm going to send you the entire summary of everything that went on about patients. If I want to get to the meds, we go get to the meds so that we can do some reconciliation. Or if I want to get labs or imaging results or claims data or quality data, we can get to some of that granular data, and we can do that in a way that we engineers call RESTfully, which is basically using the web and the standards available for the web. It's a standard that's got broad support in the industry, more support than I've ever seen from anything coming out of any healthcare standards development activity. And I would have to say, in my history, I spent some time doing development with standards bodies such as the W3C, and I worked alongside people who developed standards such as XML. The director of a product that I worked on was co-chair of XSLT. These are general IT standards. FHIR has as much buzz as they do in our industry, and as much support. It is, and I will talk about how it's an easier way to do things. We'll actually see a couple of examples. You're going to see some code. You're going to see some pointy brackets. We're going to make this very simple and painless, though, for you. FHIR is also the source of many bad puns. It's perhaps the single best marketing thing that ever happened to HL7 by accident, right? Because now you have this standard called FHIR, and everybody can talk about how it's this hot new thing, or it's setting data on fire, or interoperability on fire, and and the media just loves it. So it's sort of a media angel. I got to tell you, in organizations that are volunteer organizations that really don't have a whole lot of funding for marketing, having an accident like that is wonderful because it means it just sort of promotes itself. There are a couple of insider jokes about FHIR. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? FHIR. So if you pronounce FHIR, FHIR, F-H-I-R, that's 4. HL7 version 4. Okay, which means all of the people in Canada who've been, pushing all ahead on version 3 have a great deal of fear. Okay, so these are some of the inside jokes about FHIR. So it's a new standard that's developed by HL7. It stands for Fast Healthcare Information Resources, and you're also going to see that logo a lot showing up. It is a new standard, but how new is it really? Well, this has actually been under active development in HL7 for something like 4 years. And it's been rolling around in the back of people's brains since even before then. The chief architect, what we call one of the fire chiefs, probably the head fire chief in HL7, Graham Grieve, is Australian native, who in August of 2011 started working on this. And actually he was working through the summer before even August. It was transferred to HL7 in 2012. So he actually created this as part of something that was called the Fresh Look activity that was going on in HL7 in the 2011 period. That was a board-appointed task force from HL7 originally, headed up by Stan Huff from Intermountain, who many of you may have heard of. They did, at one of the working group meetings, they had a bunch of people come together and present a bunch of different ideas. One of them eventually spun off and became CIMI, which is Clinical Information Modeling Initiative, that's looking to come back into HL7 now. And then there was this other activity, which wasn't called FHIR at the time, but which was what was to become FHIR. It went through about another year's worth of development, and we published a ballot, so a document that went out that says, here's what we think is what we should be doing with this specification. Went out to all of the HL7 members. They said, yeah, no, maybe, etc. And then we came back and spent another 6 months looking at all of that feedback, literally 700, 800 comments on the specification that came back, revised the specification in response to that, and then published in the beginning of January 2014 the draft standard for trial use. So what does that mean, draft standard for trial use? It means that HL7 thinks this is good enough for people to start playing with. Okay, this is not its finished form. I think it's Pokemon. If any of your kids have Pokemon, you might know a little bit about they change shape over time and then they have a final form. Well, DSTU1 is not FHIR's final form. We are at the stage right now where the second draft standard for trial use is in QA. It's been published. The QA version is actually up online. You can see what is very likely to become the second edition of the DSTU. And it's not unusual for a big standard to go through a couple of these cycles of it's not quite ready yet, it's better, it's a little bit better, and gets improved over time. So that's expected to be published real soon now. I'm not even going to quote a date. We're in QA, we're looking at it, we're fixing the spelling errors, we're fixing the last little problems. There's no new material at this stage that's going to change it. And this is not the last time this is going to happen. There are future versions. So some of the work on things like financial transactions is still in its very first form. And it's got more evolution that's got to happen. Okay. It is a RESTful API. We'll look at what does it mean to be RESTful on a couple of slides here. But that basically means it's supporting the web. It's using the same standards that the web uses to access information. You're all familiar with the Lego, right? The building blocks, the classic sort of example of how we want interoperability to work. Everybody pulls out the Lego metaphor. Okay, so I have my mandatory picture of a Lego block. up here. But we're using this as a building block for developing computer software. So how many people here played with Lego as a kid? How many shapes did you have when you were a kid? I remember about 5 or 6, but 4, okay? How many shapes you got today? There's probably 1,000. I have a set at home. I could probably count at least 50 or 60. And they start to get a little bit specialized. But the complexity of that, there's still a lot of similarity across a lot of those shapes. And the variation, the difference between that 1 block long, 3-level high, narrow thing between it being 8 and being 16 things long, that's not that big of a variation. But how many resources sort of gives you an idea about complexity. So DSTU1 covered the core resources, covered infrastructure, it covered a lot of the clinical resources, and we had 50 resources in that first edition DSTU1. Now, DSTU Release 2 has doubled that, about 104 resources, so a little bit more than double. I don't know what my confidence intervals are there, but close to double. And we're saying about 150 resources expected in the final standard. And I actually feel pretty comfortable that with that 150 sort of upper limit as being pretty solid for what's going to come out when we get final. And what's planned right now, we know we have what we're preliminarily calling a 2.1 release of the DSTU, and I'm certain there'll be a 3.0 release of the DSTU before we finally get to the final stages. There are about 6 different kinds of resource in FHIR. So that's sort of like, I got sort of the square chunky blocks, and I have the long narrow blocks, and I have the blocks with the wheels on them and the blocks with the holes on them. We have clinical resources for common clinical uses. You know, what you would normally think of, my problem, medication, allergy, lab result, kinds of things. My patient, my provider, et cetera, move into the next step of I need to track people, places, and things, nouns. Care processes. I got to order a med. Would like to have this patient have a referral. Those sorts of activities going on. There's a lot of infrastructure. You need pieces. So you're going to need media. You're going to need to have support binary resources to deal with your huge DICOM images, because we're not going to turn all that huge chunk of image data into anything other than the binary blob that everybody already knows how to work with. Then we start to get into some resources that are going to ensure interoperability. These are resources that talk about FHIR itself. My server supports these capabilities. When it responds with a particular resource, these are the vocabularies that we support. So you can start to actually, in real time, understand what the systems are doing and have some resolution of, well, okay, how much interoperability can I get with that server? Let me go query its conformance resources and find out what's going on there. And then you have profiling. What guides, what implementation guides and other activities does it support? And then financial resources. So unlike what we did in the 70s and the 80s, where we focused on coding for financial reasons and doing all of our electronic stuff for the financial side, that came first, and now we're going to add codes for the clinical side. What we're doing in FHIR is we focused on the clinical side first, and the financial stuff, that, well, sorry, you guys sort of got the back seat on this. However, there's a lot of interest on the financial side of sort of leapfrogging from today's EDI level standards, which are based on UN EDIFACT work done in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and sort of leapfrogging into the next generation and saying, yeah, we'd like to do FHIR 2. So those are the 6 categories. We'll look at each of them at a fairly high level. So these are your clinical resources. We have allergy and intolerance, clinical impression, so this is what I think is going on with this patient. Condition, so essentially the core of what you're going to see on your problem list, but it could also be specific findings or symptoms. So at different levels of medical judgment, the idea of condition. And we don't call it problem because you're going to have things like pregnancy. Well, that shouldn't be a problem, but it certainly is a medical condition that has to be dealt with. Detected issue sort of rolls up the idea of contraindication or other issue that we need to be concerned with. Family member history, procedures, risk assessment. You get into care planning. So what's my plan? What am I trying to do? Not sure why nutrition order is in care planning, but I think maybe that has to do with where people thought. I know it recently moved. It used to be over here in this column. As a matter of fact, I didn't even change the column head where it used to be. Procedure request, referral request, visions, prescription. And as I said, this is also a moving target. This is a thing we're still working on in HL7. Lots of stuff going on about medications, and then some resources to deal with immunizations. So if you're trying to do your medication reconciliation, you might want to be looking at the medication statements and the medication orders and the medications that might actually be reported or identified in the medication order and the medication statement to say, these are the things that the patient's telling me that's going on or that I'm actually seeing listed for this patient, and let's get all of that data and try to make sense out of it. Diagnosis, specific results, so an observation, could be a lab result, could be a vital sign, any sort of coded or measurable finding. Diagnostic report, which is not just a single coded finding, but a collection of them put together as part of a particular test. So you're not going to have just the observation. You're going to link that observation with the report and the interpretation and everything that goes along with that. And associated with that, you could have also a diagnostic order. Your imaging study, related with the imaging study. I might have a key image, or not just a key image, but a specific area on that image that I want to highlight. So I can highlight images, and then in all of these results, you're going to need to be able to talk about things like the specimen or the body site. People, places, okay, kinds of organizations and ways that people and places are grouped together. Devices. So we had somebody over here who was interested in devices. FHIR actually has 3 specific resources. One to talk about the device itself, and where do we actually assign the good ID, right? The new FDA assigned universal device identifiers. There's a place in device for doing that, but we also know devices are actually made up of different pieces, and each one of those might also be a device. So we have a way to describe that through device component. And then devices have metrics. They have measures that are being produced, configuration parameters, etc., that we also need to manage at a particular level. Then we're going to be managing the patient. So now we get into workflow. And I have my encounters, my episodes of care, communications I have back and forth. So you go into your portal and I send my doctor a message and I get a response back that says, okay, we need to have you come in and do X, Y, Z. Of course, I've only had a portal in my practice for a couple of weeks yet, so I haven't actually tried that capability out to see how well that works. but it's there, so you have a way to track that communication as a fire resource. Deal with all of your scheduling, and then lots of the workflow that goes on in care. I'm going to request something, I'm going to get a response back, so you're going to see that pattern fairly commonly. I'm going to have a request and a response. I'm going to request something be supplied to the patient. Might be a medication, might be a wheelchair, crutches, those little mobility devices that you see on late night television, the delivery of that particular device, or a request for communication. Would you please, send me that stuff you said you were going to send me? Device use request and a device use statement. So all of the different workflows that are associated with that. I'm not sure why this is not displaying the way it displayed when I ran through all this last night. But I'm not going to go ahead and play with it. Infrastructure supports the architectural framework. So we have ways to actually build a questionnaire, build an assessment form, build a history form, build whatever, and get a response back. Every resource has the ability to associate the provenance of that resource. So who created it, when it was created, where it was created, what system created it, what device was it from, et cetera. All of that thing that helps you understand the reliability of the resource, the history of it, what happened with it, which is not the same thing as its audit trail. Audits have to do with access requests and additions and deletions and creations, et cetera. So we have resources to deal with that. Documentation, different ways to put together a document. It's called a composition in FHIR. You're basically creating this thing that is composed of a bunch of resources and is human readable. Document reference and document manifest. Document reference is a way to reference an individual document that might be stored somewhere else. A manifest is a list of documents. We use that an awful lot when we're communicating about patients. When you're doing an imaging study and you're actually building a key image note, what you're doing in that space is building a manifest of the list of key images that the physician should take a look at. When you're talking about the history that's associated with a patient, you're building the list of documents that a physician might want to look at. So you have this notion of document manifest, which can be very useful in health information exchange. Basic structure, so binary, media, bundles are things, collections of resources that aren't necessarily considered to be a whole composition. They might be in response to a query. So it's part of the infrastructure. You have a basic resource which in all of the world of standards in HL7 version 2, you have the OBX segment. In version 3, you have the observation RIM class. These are sort of the horrors of the standards world. You put whatever in it that fits, anything. And so the idea behind BASIC is, well, we need a place to stick the stuff that doesn't fit anywhere else, but it's not really an observation. We need a place to deal with extensibility and understand that when people do this with their OBXs or their observations, what they're really doing is extending the standard. So that's what BASIC is a place to support extensibility. Some infrastructure that IT geeks care about, message headers, what happened to this outcome, what's the error here, what are the parameters to this particular request that we made, et cetera. How do I turn this into a subscription that I can just sort of connect back to regularly, sort of like an RSS feed. Terminology, crucial if you're trying to understand what's going on. You have to know that we're all talking the same words. One of the great things about that I've learned about healthcare is sort of the use of common terminology internationally, right? So when you say proximal and distal, as a physician, every other physician in the world understands what you're talking about. No normal human patient like me will realize that you're talking about near and far. You know, we say front and back. We say near and far. And you have a whole different set of vocabulary. Very precise meaning. And you need that to convey understanding, right? But I'm sure you're never talking to your patients about distal and proximal, right? Because you've got to be using the right vocabulary to talk to them as well. So terminology, important to be able to access terminology. Important to be able to talk about the structure of things so that you can do stuff with it. Important to understand what a system can do, what it conforms to, what the operations it's able to do look like, and the kinds of searches that you can perform. These are sort of, to the computer, the help button on the Google page, if you could ever find it. There is actually a place where you can get information that says, here's how search works. Here's how this operation works. And oh, by the way, here's everything that I can do. You know, today when you plug a printer into your computer, how do you think the two of them understand, oh, your printer, your dot matrix, you have this much resolution and you have all of this other stuff? Well, there's a negotiation that's going on there. And it's because the computer can actually ask the printer through that USB connection, who are you, what do you do, what sorts of operations do you support? So now we have this available in FHIR, something that we have not had in HL7 version 3, HL7 version 2, or anything that sort of went before. And FHIR goes yet one step further in saying, and if you want to write an implementation guide, you can write the implementation guide in FHIR. You can actually create a FHIR resource that explains all of these things that need to be understood. And if you want to make sure that somebody actually does what the implementation guide says it does, you can also create resources to say, here's how you could actually test this. That's critical from my perspective, because I create an average of 1 or 2 implementation guides a year in the various standards organizations that I work in. And we wind up throwing that over the wall to another group that builds these test scripts. But these test scripts are combinations of shell scripts and Python and all of this stuff that you need this huge infrastructure to install and play with. Here now, we can have the test script be described in a way that a computer can understand, and then it could figure out how to go off and execute it using Python, using shell commands, using whatever it needs to accomplish that. And then we get to the financial area, which some folks might be interested in. Right? You know, what's the patient's coverage? We need to check to see if they're eligible for this particular service. Like to enroll them so that they can get coverage. Now that we've verified that they're eligible for this particular service, we perform the services. We'd like for you to pay us. Okay, here's your claim back. Saying, yes, okay, we got your claim, it looks good. And, you know, a month later, oh, look, we just paid you for that claim. A way to reconcile the payments. And, oh, by the way, another way to communicate where you can say to the patient, here's how you benefited from our services. I know people in the insurance world who say an explanation of benefit is neither. Okay? But we have an explanation of benefit resource so that piece of paper you get back from your payer that says, oh, you went to the doctor, they did this and such service, they billed so much, here's our reduction, here's the amount of your deductible that has to apply, and here's how much we paid. And ultimately, that last column is always 0. I don't know how that works. They've got a great job, great model. And then there's a total at the bottom that says this is what I'm going to have to pay. And then that shows back up as a bill from the provider and 3 other providers and 3 separate bills. So explanation of benefit, we have a resource to handle that. So now you had a brief introduction to FHIR. Where can you find the specification? Well, you go to www.hl7.org/FHIR, and that will bring you to this page. This is the current draft standard for trial use. That is the most recent, quote-unquote, official version. There are a number of versions that have been published, and here's the QA preview. So we'll go there. This is what's going to be coming out soon to a theater near you that the developers are going to be actively testing in early October. And then you can look at the resources and drill down into each resource, etc. The other thing that I want to show you is on each of these pages, when you start at this home page, right under implementation, there is a downloads page. You can download all of the technical materials that you need to implement FHIR. Developers love this. But even better yet, the entire specification, the FHIR specification right up top there, you can download this entire collection of web pages and put it locally on your laptop or host it on your corporate server or in your organization's network, and everybody who needs to can have local access so you don't have to worry about, oh, I can't get through my firewall. I have to add HL7 to the list of organizations that I've got, you know, add them to the white list so that I can get there when I'm sitting in the hospital trying to access the network. You can say, well, let's just not even try to fight that battle. Let's just put it out locally on the network and do all of the appropriate other stuff that you have to do when you install new software on your network so that you can have access to it. All open source, too. So there is an open source license for all of this material. So let's talk a little bit about support. There were a couple people here who had questions about who supports this. So one of my colleagues, John Murky, also works for GE Healthcare. He's been on the FHIR management group since it was formed in HL7. So this is the governance organization in HL7 that is made up of HL7 members who are very involved in making sure that FHIR succeeds. We are also using FHIR internally as part of our new development. If you've heard about Predicts for Healthcare and all of that other stuff that our marketing people put out, some of that's going in there. Commonwealth Health Alliance, which is a group that is like Cerner, McKesson, Athena Health, Allscripts, and I can't even remember all of the list of names, and it's growing. They used version 0.65, so even before DSTU1, in some of their early specifications for how record locators would work, how access to documents would be given, and they're looking to update that to a new version. And that's according to a presentation from David McCauley at the EHR Member Association meeting in HIMSS last year. Epic announced that they would be supporting it. They made that announcement at their users group in 2014. They're now rolling out versions of Epic in 2015 that do support it. I don't know what that actually means for organizations that are currently using Epic, such as OHSU, but it certainly means that you should be asking questions about your organization. If you've got an EHR and you want to find out if they're supporting the standard, you should ask the question. And the answer might be, well, yes, that's in our new version, which you don't have yet. Okay, I hear that a lot. And, you know, sort of like, yeah, I'm sorry, you want me to fix it, but then you also want me to come in and install it at your site immediately after we release the new standard, and there's time that takes to get that out. Other supporters, Athena Health, Cerner, Meditech, McKesson, they've all demonstrated the ability to use FHIR, presented materials in HIMSS or somewhere else publicly to show that they're actively supporting it. And they've all been participating. So FHIR in HL7 does something called a Connectathon, sort of patterned after what an IHE Connectathon. So their goal is to become like an IHE Connectathon, where you've got several hundred people in a room, or several hundred, more than several hundred, in a room with several hundred machines in a room, trying to test interoperability between multiple vendors. They're more like a hackathon right now, where they're taking the standard, they're trying out new pieces of it, making sure all of this stuff works. So all of those vendors that I just mentioned have been involved in some of those activities. We've also had folks from Oracle, folks from IBM, folks from Accenture who've been involved in some of the activities at Connectathons, checking stuff out, seeing what's going on, poking at things. Lots of healthcare provider organizations are presently supporting development in the standard. Some of them financially, some of them by forming consortia to go off and do various interesting things, or being very involved in leading consortia that are doing some things. So BIDMC, how many people know who the CIO is at BIDMC? Right, John Halemko. Part of something called the Argonaut Project. Very involved in the development there. Boston Children's Hospital has an MD/engineer by the name of Josh Mandel, who is one of the fire chiefs, one of the software developers who is actually pushing the standard ahead. Intermountain Healthcare, Stan Hoff, very involved in developing some consortia around healthcare organizations developing smart-based apps to support this. Mayo Clinic, Partners Healthcare System, VA, all involved. So how many people here are involved in a healthcare organization that is presently supporting FHIR? How many of you don't know whether your organization is supporting FHIR or not? And how many people here know that your organization isn't supporting FHIR? Okay. So, the question you might want to ask is, so how do you change that? How do you get involved? And we'll explore a little bit of that. So we talked about some of the EHR vendors. There are also interface engineers who are supporting FHIR. These are the ones who've announced that they're going to be doing stuff with it or have already done something with it. So I'm not telling you anything that's sort of secret knowledge that I have. This is based on public information. So CorePoint, Mirth, sort of the open source interface engine that a lot of people like to use because it's open source. Orion, the CorePoint's like way up there in best in class is their marketing spiel that they like to give. Qvera. Qvera is let's see, they're in Salt Lake City, but that's folks that I often work with because we use them in some of our products. Initiatives supporting FHIR. So IHE, Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise, is a profiling organization. So it's like an SDO, but they build implementation guides rather than standards. We did 6, 7, 8, I've lost track, probably up to 9 profiles in the last year based on FHIR. We talked about Commonwealth. Argonaut is, I don't know, at this point it's probably somewhere between $500,000 and $750,000 project working alongside HL7 to accelerate the development of FHIR. Healthcare Services Platform Consortium, so there you have Intermountain and the VA and Cerner and several other organizations working together to build a platform to support an app store that is based on two things, SMART and FHIR, HL7 FHIR. ONC's standards project, the data access framework, is profiling FHIR for use with U.S. national projects. And one of the high-tech grant projects, a SMART project, in which Ken Mandel, Zach Cohn, and Josh Mandel actually come out of. It was an ONC-funded grant project, and that's how Josh originally got involved in doing the FHIR development. As Doug said, you know, talk to the smart people, and I said, you know, you guys need to be paying attention over here and doing some stuff with that. So they put Josh on it, and Josh has been a tremendous help in the development of that work. Interestingly enough, the U.S. is the latecomer to a lot of the efforts that have been going on. This effort started in Australia. We have very strong leadership. The FHIR chiefs come from the Netherlands, Australia, and Canada. There are three, and there are three that are sort of the acknowledged FHIR chiefs. That's Graham Grieve, Lloyd McKenzie, and Ewald Kramer, who Australia, Canada, and Netherlands. So we're sort of playing a little bit of catch up. Open source implementation. So when FHIR went DSTU 1.0 back in January of 2014, there were 3, or originally there were 2, and then a week later there were 3 full open source implementations of the servers on 3 different platforms for the specification. I haven't seen that since XML in terms of standards, and I've never seen that in healthcare. We basically had DSTU reference implementations the day the DSTU was published. That's a level of quality that is above what we currently do in healthcare standards, more often than not. So the de facto HL7 reference server is built by Graham Grieve. It's on something called Delphi with Windows and SQL Server. Delphi is what Borland Pascal became. So it's sort of an edge platform in terms of what people currently use, but it's still fairly effective. Josh's Smart platform, Java, Groovy, and MongoDB, and that supports both the Smart activities and the FHIR activities. FHIR, that's where EWOC comes out of. In the Netherlands, they have a .NET with MongoDB implementation available. So UHN has clients in Java. You have other implementations, and there's a growing list of these particular activities. So now we get into a little bit of what can you do with this. So you have read access through FHIR to the granular data. Number of different ways that you can do that. How do you do that? Well, if you've ever put a trace on your HDP stack and said, "This what's actually happening? This is what's happening under the covers," and this is a request for a resource in FHIR for get me the patient whose family name is Smith and whose given name is John. That's how simple it looks. Prior specifications with HL7 would have given you, if you printed them out, it would probably be this thick, pages of XML, 5 to 10 pages of XML. This is what it looks like in FHIR. Somebody said fast. As an engineer, the line of code I can write to actually make that request is 5 lines of code. To do that as an HL7 version 3 transaction, after I figure out all of the schemas, so I can write that in less than 5 minutes and have it compiled and running against Graham's test server. If I were doing that in version 3, 5 hours. This really is a lot of work that has to go on with schema and everything else. maybe not even 5 hours. Perhaps if I have to start tweaking the schemas and doing some other stuff, 5 days. Version 2, if I want to issue that query using HL7 version 2 and I already have the infrastructure, I can write the code to issue that transaction in about 15 minutes. Fast, I can write that code fast. What's the most important thing for interoperability? How fast can people turn your problems into solutions? Oh, by the way, every engineer that gets out of a software development program in school knows how to do this. They do not know how to interpret HL7 version 3 XML. I can teach them. It will take me about 2 years. Okay. I can teach them. I could actually hand them chapters 1, 2, and 3 of version 2 and say, read this and build me the stuff, and they can do it in about 2 weeks through reading it. Version 3, they may never get there. With FHIR, literally they're going online to some of these reference servers, these open source reference servers that are out there today, and you're getting seniors in high school hitting Epic's online test server where people can go play in their sandbox. Seniors in high school. That's what's fast about FHIR. This is what the output looks like. And yeah, it's still pointy brackets and it's still pretty ugly, but it's human readable as opposed to the HL7 version 3, which was all about everything being pristine and based on a common model and something that only an architect could love. This, I can hand to an engineer. I can even teach you how to read this. Right? Here's the name. Its use is official. The family part of it is Smith. The given part of it is John. Right? You can read that. And you can see the same sort of thing here, where you can read and understand that. No more counting pipes and hats and little tildes in your V2 messages, or trying to figure out what this weird construction of an entity with a type code and a mood code and what all that other stuff means. It's all pretty clear there. Now, you take that same stuff that you get back, this is what you actually have to write, and you can do a put. You know there were very simple HTTP requests to store information on a web server. There are. Post, which is what you typically do when you fill out forms. They're written or edited using the same format, so it's in the same XML or it's in the same JSON format. And then you can get version history through a variety of different operations. Furthermore, I can create new operations to say, hey, you know, here is an order for an imaging service. Would you go please check to see if that order is appropriate according to AUC criteria? I got a patient who's got a headache, and I want to do an MRI scan on his head. And it can come back with a response after going through and just looking at the order and who did the order and the indications and the service to say, oh, I got some more questions. Is that the worst headache in the patient's life? So you could define that operation. You can put that in a profile and specify how to conform to that profile. And now you have something that somebody can interrogate, integrate with, and figure out how to make this stuff work. So FHIR already defines several operations. One of them is this notion of I want to translate a concept. Where might you use that? So you want to translate concepts from what standards used by one country to standards used by another country. So standards used by the US and maybe the rest of the world, like ICD-9 and ICD-10. Or perhaps crossing from the clinical domain to the financial domain. So I've got my code, it's an MSCT, what's this right code for it so that I can get paid, right? I've got a LOINC code. What's the actual code I have to use to order the lab that's associated with that in my institution? So lots of different uses for these sorts of operations. The specifications are very easy to read. They're all available on the web. They have a sort of a simple XML representation of how you can read it. Engineers find this very readable compared to the HL7 schemas, which we look at and we go, my head just exploded. All of that stuff that's in color is clickable and will take you through the entire specification. You find out that the basic resource has an identifier, has a code, has a subject. When you see this shape, you know it's pointing to another resource. These resources are linked together. What's the web about? Linking. What's RESTful about? Well, we're using resources, and these resources are linked to each other. So we don't have to completely re-specify a subject as being any kind of resource or an author as being a resource that's associated with some kind of person. We can just say point to the patient or the related person or the practitioner who created this thing and tell me who they are. How do we develop this? Well, we had in HL7 version 3, we had our own tooling. We spent years developing it, and there was tens, perhaps even hundreds of thousands of dollars building specialized software that ran in Visio and doing a lot of this other stuff. Today, nope, use a spreadsheet. Fill out the tabs. There are 6 key tabs that you have to fill out. The instructions tell you what tabs you have to fill out and how to fill them out. And then this runs through. You save it in XML format. This runs through. And you're able now to turn that into the FHIR specification. My computer is not frozen. Okay. So now we get a little bit to the interactive piece of this. And I realize some people have to go. But very quickly. So what problems do you think FHIR could help you solve? So you had the problem with reconciliation. So what's the first step that you have to do to be able to reconcile your maps? So you have to find a common vocabulary. So you have to be able to access the vocabulary that's associated with all of the different meds. You might even have to translate. I'm ordering meds now in NDC codes, and later I'm going to do RX norm. Right. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
I said NDC and RX norm are exactly the ones that
every
are
NDC
presenting the
code
problem.
translates to one and only one RX norm code. There's an operation for that in FHIR to do that translation. You also have to be able to get access to what the medication is, the specific medication statements. The patient says, I'm taking this. What medications have been supplied to the patient through supply. So you have resources to get at that sort of thing. Somebody, I'm sorry, our HIM person left. So anybody else have a particular problem that you'd be looking to solve with FHIR here?
This. How would you find like where things are, what things are called, for example? Let's say I need, like I'm thinking about, we're doing a lot of work in quality measures, and there are a lot of kind of arbitrary kinds of coded values that are stored in there, and how would I determine if they're in there or not, and what they would be called? Is there some sort of general searching scheme?
Okay, so
for different kinds of resources, or
so for your quality measures, let's take a quick look at something here. So for your quality measures, you have a quality measure, and it might be for patients with symptoms of acute myocardial infarction. And the way they define AMI is going to be, this list of diagnosis codes, maybe, or something like that. The question you're asking, how do I find out what those codes, what that list that they reference in the quality measure is talking about?
quality measure talks about, well, you have to hand the patient some information sheets,
and there's some essentially arbitrary coded structure where somebody checks off a box and it's stored in the EHR that they handed them this information sheet. How do I find that with FHIR?
Oh, so now you're talking a little bit about data elements. What's the data? Where's that data element located? So there is actually a resource for dealing with data elements and tying data elements to structure definitions, so that you could actually describe the structure of the EHR data in data elements. You could take your, if you happen to be one of the lucky ones, your organization has somewhere a library of here's the structure of our information. Here's our knowledge base about where all of this stuff is stored. It's a fairly extensive activity to put it together. It took 6 months in AHEMA to even come up with a paper to talk about what needed to be done to do this. So I know the activity itself is fairly extensive. But if you have that, you can describe the structure with the data that's in your EHR as data elements. And some of the current activities that are involved with clinical research at the national standards level, they're taking advantage of data elements and linking them up with questionnaires to be able to support asking clinical questions, supporting clinical trials research, as well as patient-centered outcomes research. And some of that activity going on at that level is being funded by PCORI.
So I was going to say, we should probably wrap up in the
Right.
next few minutes, but
We're about there because we're at my last slide. And so the way I handle this presentation is my questions are for you. And so this last slide is not the typical question slide, but it's more me asking you. So how are you going to explore further, and what can you do to get more engaged, and what sorts of roadblocks might be running into?
I'm going to be asking you after the lecture, how do I actually access the sandbox for China, which I have there?
Okay.
How do I send the HTTP message to get answer?
Great. So I can help you with that. There's also a Skype chat you should get on, where you can actually ask other people who might be closer to that. Other people. Dana.
I'm interested in understanding to what extent semantic interoperability is enforced. Like if you have to use a structured encoded element in the field, or it allows use of local codes.
So this is one of the areas where FHIR differs from HL7 version 3, in that HL7 version 3 was all about semantic interoperability and that magic phrase. And we talk about, instead of the patterns of use, the patterns of meaning. And the HL7 version 3 standard was all about the patterns of meaning. The FHIR standard is written in terms of patterns of use. Everything in FHIR has a mapping. So the standard itself has in it mappings back to the origin standards from which those things came from, and that gives you the meaning. So there's mappings for every FHIR thing back to the rim, just about. So if you want to learn more about FHIR, there's lots of different ways. I would suggest you start with going to hl7.org/FHIR. The other thing that you can do is that you can go to HL7 and create yourself a login from the hl7.org page. If you when you get to the page, it will actually give you a link where you can log in. If you go there, you can create a login. You do not have to be a member. Start exploring. Go to the work groups resources. There's actually now a FHIR work group. It was officially created at the last working group meeting. Sign up for the mailing lists. There's also a Skype chat if you're on Skype and you want to be added to the chat to see what the developers are actually doing. Now, by the way, that chat's very geeky. I'll be happy to add you to it. I know we are sort of running out of resources on the number of people we can add to a Skype chat. Who knew there was a limit? Apparently there is, though. But that's a way that you or one of your developers can get engaged. Feel free to email me. Anybody who wants to grab one, I do have a handful of business cards. My day job is about helping people to understand standards. And I can tell you more about how you can get connected. And I hope, at least for some of you, that you've achieved your goals today in coming here. And thank you for having me.